Everyone is looking up to the sky, waiting for the trumpets. But the final war may have already begun, not with explosions, but with alliances, not with seals being broken, but with treaties being signed. In the Book of Ezekiel, chapter 38, there is a forgotten prophecy that suddenly started breathing again. And it doesn't speak of angels falling, but of something even more terrifying. Entire nations moving like pieces on a prophetic chessboard. Israel is at the center, but our eyes must turn to an ancient name, Persia, and to another name, nearly erased from modern sermons, Gog. Ezekiel writes as if he's describing a modern invasion. In the latter days, he says, you will come from the far north. But who is this you? In the original Hebrew, the word Rosh appears, a term that for many ancient scholars refers not to a person but to a geopolitical power. Some translate it as prince. Others believe it's a proper name, a direct reference to the region we now call Russia. And here, the pieces begin to align, because alongside Rosh, the text mentions Magog, Meshech, Tubal, and Persia. Today that means Iran. The alliance between Russia and Iran is not a modern conspiracy, it's an ancient prediction. The Book of Ezekiel was written more than 2,500 years ago, yet it precisely describes what we now see in the headlines. Two military powers, anti-Israel, approaching from the north and east. But why did Ezekiel choose these names? And what did Magog mean at that time? To answer that, we must go back before modern maps, back to the Assyrian records, to clay tablets that mapped out ancestral territories. According to records from the Assyrian Empire, Magog was one of the barbarian lands north of the Caucasus, associated with warlike tribes migrating through what is now Georgia, southern Russia, and parts of Iran. Archaeology doesn't ignore these details. Many ancient maps trace Magog to the Eurasian steppes, precisely the region where Russian and Iranian interests converge today, as if history were obeying a secret script hidden for millennia, and someone is pulling the strings. But Ezekiel doesn't just list names. He describes the movement. You will come up against my people Israel, like a cloud covering the land. A cloud, a shadow, a war that doesn't start with tanks, but with the spread of fear, with silent drones, with technology, with intelligence. And here, a darker layer emerges, the Book of Enoch, almost always ignored by traditional theologians, yet revered by seekers of hidden wisdom, because in it, the Watchers also came from the east, and they started a war, not between nations, but between bloodlines. The Watchers were angels who crossed heavenly boundaries to create a hybrid offspring, and that offspring, the Nephilim, brought a war to earth that never truly ended. According to Enoch, the leading fallen ones came from eastern regions, from Mount Hermon, Mesopotamia, and ancient Persia. This is not coincidence. It is a spiritual pattern. The same place from which the Watchers rebelled is the same ground from which the armies of prophecy are rising again. Iran, Russia, and others yet to be revealed. The war of Ezekiel 38 is not only about physical armies, it's about spiritual lineages in conflict. As if a hidden promise were being activated behind the headlines. What if the Watchers are once again moving the pawns? What if the spirit of war from the east was never defeated, just silenced? The Bible says the final battle will involve a hook in the jaw of Gog, pulling him toward Israel. And when that happens, the whole earth will feel it. Not through earthquakes, but through a spiritual shift. If the names are symbolic, like Rosh, Magog, Meshech, and Tubal, then what do they represent today? Many ancient rabbis interpreted Gog not as a literal person, but as a spirit of coalition, a force that unites old enemies under one purpose. And Persia, in that context, is not just a nation. It is a reactivated spiritual seal, an ancient entity returning to the stage of nations. And the question screaming between the lines is, are we recognizing the players, or just watching the soldiers? And here, the loop closes and reopens. Because if Ezekiel saw the end, and Enoch saw the beginning, what happens when we read those books together? The final attack may be the same one that began before the flood. Gog's prophecy is perhaps the modern echo of an ancient war that never ended. And this war may already be happening, right before our eyes, camouflaged in treaties, alliances, and headlines that few are truly understanding. Now, what if I told you that the greatest mistake is not waiting for the war, but ignoring the fact that it's already begun, because the next chapter will reveal what the Bible says Gog is actually after, and why Israel is only the final target of something that started long before history itself. If this made sense to you, subscribe now. Perhaps your soul recognized something that your mind is still trying to understand. The name Gog sounds strange, ancient, disconnected, but it never disappeared. It just changed its clothing. We're not talking about a mere political leader, but a prophetic symbol, an archetype of domination. The Bible doesn't describe Gog as just another dictator. It portrays him as someone who acts by impulse, pulled by a hook placed by God. And that changes everything. Because if Gog is pulled, then he's not in control. He's a piece, a tool in a greater plan. But for what? What is he seeking? Power, territory, or something that Israel is protecting? The text in Ezekiel 38 is clear. Gog advances to take plunder, but the original Hebrew uses a deeper word, shalal. This word doesn't just refer to physical wealth. It refers to something sacred, claimed as the result of a holy war, an inheritance, a throne, a divine code. And here we begin to see the true motivation behind the attack. It's not about oil or natural gas. It's about the place where the name of God was once inscribed. A spiritual war disguised as a territorial conflict. Israel, though small, is the center of an invisible war. The Temple Mount is the thin line between heaven and earth. Many believe the Ark of the Covenant is hidden there. Others speak of celestial portals. But what few notice is that to Gog, this place represents the final spiritual resistance against an empire of global control. He doesn't want to merely destroy Israel. He wants to usurp the spiritual authority carried by this land since the time of Abraham. The prophet Daniel had already announced that in the time of the end, the king of the north would rise against the holy people with cunning and violence. The very traits linked to Gog, a leader who gathers armies to fulfill a greater plan. And the connection with Iran reinforces this. Ancient Persia always carried messianic ambitions. In Zoroastrian tradition, the Saoshyant, a warrior messiah, would rise to purify the world through fire. That prophecy was never forgotten. It was simply absorbed into the modern rhetoric of the Ayatollahs. But there's more. The Book of Enoch mentions that the Watchers taught humans magic, warfare, and territorial enchantments. They didn't just descend to earth, they territorialized evil. And the region of Iran, Mesopotamia, and the Caucasus was the epicenter of this spiritual corruption. The children of the Watchers were imprisoned there. And according to Enoch, they would be released at the end of time. So when Ezekiel speaks of the alliance between Gog, Persia, and other nations, could he be describing the release of the spiritual offspring of the fallen? Archaeology reveals another disturbing detail. The name Meshech was used in Hittite and Assyrian inscriptions to describe tribes in Anatolia, the region we now associate with Turkey. Tubal referred to a neighboring tribe. Together, these nations form an arc around Israel, a siege, a prophetic ring, and what lies at the center of this ring, Jerusalem, the city where time and eternity meet. For Gog, physical destruction isn't enough. He must spiritually occupy it. It's a theft of a throne, a coup of bloodlines, and perhaps the most unsettling part. Ezekiel says that God himself will allow it. He will place the hook. He will let the attack unfold, as if he wants to prove something, as if he intends to expose what is hidden in every nation, every leader, every witness. This is not a random apocalypse. It's judgment disguised as geopolitics. And what if this war is a mirror? What if what's about to happen outside of us is only the physical reflection of a war that has already begun within? Here, the emotional loop deepens, because each nation mentioned by Ezekiel represents not just a people, but a spiritual choice. Are you Israel or part of Gog's army? Do you protect what is sacred or long to claim it for yourself? Gog does not begin outside. He begins inside, and that's why he must be pulled. His thirst for conquest makes him blind, and his blindness makes him useful for a higher plan, a plan that will separate those who resist from those who bow to the spirit of domination. But what if Gog is already moving? What if the invasion doesn't start with tanks, but with ideologies? What if the final war is being fought in speeches, in quiet alliances, in platforms no one questions? Up next, We'll dive into the invisible signs that reveal how this prophetic coalition is being built and why the world is pretending not to see. If what you've discovered here challenged you in any way, leave a comment. I want to know if you also feel that this war has already begun inside us. When you picture a world war, you imagine tanks, planes, and explosions. But Ezekiel's prophecy points to a different dynamic: the union of unlikely nations under a common goal. Gog, as an archetype, doesn't conquer alone. He unites peoples who were once enemies, now embracing each other under the same mission: to destabilize Israel and reshape the planet's spiritual order. A war born at the table of alliances and nurtured in the shadows of political interests. And now, that alliance is visible. Russia and Iran, or rather Rosh and Persia, are becoming increasingly intertwined. Their military cooperation, joint drills, and technology exchanges are not just strategic moves. They are fulfillments of a prophecy that many still refuse to read literally. Add Turkey to the equation, represented by Meshech and Tubal, and you have the vertices of a triangle described over 2,000 years ago, a triangle that surrounds Israel. Not only physically but spiritually. There's growing unease in Jerusalem. The Israel Defense Forces know this isn't about conventional threats. The danger comes from the east, but also from the north, and from the sky. With Iranian drones used in the war in Ukraine and Russia's presence in Syria, the airspace over the Middle East has become prophetic territory. A tense silence hovers over the borders, as if the world is waiting for something, or as if something is already underway, and few have the courage to name it. Ancient rabbis believed that Gog would ride atop the nations of the north, but that his spirit would already be moving among the people before the war even erupted, like an invisible fermentation, a code passed down from generation to generation, awaiting the appointed time to manifest. And the time seems to have come. The collapse of old alliances, the fragmentation of NATO, the rise of Eastern powers. These aren't just headlines. They're warnings, fragments of prophecy unfolding before our eyes. In the Book of Enoch, there is an enigmatic reference to the kings of the mountains who would awaken in the last days. They would bring with them the ancient secrets of war, domination, and spiritual corruption. Many associate this with the spiritual descendants of the Watchers, tribes, systems, or entire nations that carry the signature of rebellion. The same rebellion that began in Eden, passed through Babel, and now breathes in modern capitals. Gog may be an ancient name, but his essence is still alive. What makes this alliance so dangerous is not just its military might. It's the kind of war it represents, a hybrid war, one that blends religion, technology, artificial intelligence, disinformation, and spiritual collapse. A war where the enemy doesn't wear a uniform. He comes as a diplomat, as a champion of resistance, as a savior of traditional values. But behind the speeches, he carries the same spirit of Gog, the usurpation of what is sacred, the theft of bloodlines, the denial of the living God. While the world debates politics, economics, and resources, Ezekiel's text whispers, "Prepare yourself, you and all your armies." It doesn't say fight, it says prepare, because the final war will be a clash of spiritual readiness. Those who fail to discern the signs will be swallowed by the dominant narrative, and that narrative is already being written in speeches, in shows, in algorithms. You won't see tanks at your doorstep, but you'll feel your soul bowing, without knowing exactly why. The final coalition won't form in a single day, but once complete, it will be too late to question. And every piece is already in place. Iran, with its messianic ideology. Russia, with its imperial restoration. Turkey, the North African nations, and others that will be drawn like flies to an ancient spirit dressed in modern clothes. It's the old Gog, with new armor, with new language, but with the same destiny, to confront the Most High. And the pressing question is, who else will be dragged into this plan? Because the next chapter will reveal the forgotten names that appear alongside Persia and Magog, and why even Western nations may already be collaborating with this silent pact. And what if Gog's allies are the ones pretending to oppose him? Are you still here? Then share this video with someone who's never stopped to see the world through spiritual eyes. This message needs to spread before the siege closes in. No one expects the traitors to wear suits, but the Bible already knew. Ezekiel 38 doesn't just mention Gog, Magog, and Persia. It also names Cush, Put, Gomer, and the house of Togarmah in the far north. Names that sound exotic, almost irrelevant to those who read in haste. But these names conceal the true players of the prophetic game, reaching far beyond the Middle East. Cush is Ethiopia. Put is Libya. Gomer, according to many scholars, refers to Central Europe, and Togarmah is the shadow that hovers over Turkey and parts of Asia Minor, an ancient map with modern connections. But what do these nations have in common? They share a strategic silence. None of them rise in defense of Israel. None cry out against the invasion. They are listed as Gog's companions, perhaps not on the front lines, but in the complicit rear guard. Ethiopia, once a land of sacred alliances, is now silenced by internal wars. Libya, consumed by chaos. Turkey, drifting further from the west. And Europe? Gomer may have already traded faith for convenience. Silence is also a form of alliance. And when the prophecy says Gog comes with many peoples, it's not just talking about armies. It's about nations that don't resist, that sell out, that choose the comfort of neutrality over the courage of truth. The modern West, obsessed with geopolitical balance, may be opening the door to the greatest spiritual betrayal of all time, because when the final war arrives, it won't be won by tanks, but by those who can still see. There's a cryptic passage in the Book of Enoch that reads, "And those who walk with the sons of the watchers shall make pacts beneath the shadow of their gates, but will not recognize them as masters." At first glance, it seems absurd, but it's exactly what we see today. Nations don't say they follow Gog. They just do business. They stabilize regions. They balance powers. But underneath it all, they are handing over spiritual authority to the very ones who once defied the throne of God. And what about America? The Bible doesn't mention it directly, but many scholars point to a curious clue. In Ezekiel 38:13, a strange group appears: Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, with all their young lions. These observers ask, "Have you come to seize plunder?" But they do nothing. Tarshish was a distant trading colony, identified by some as part of the Iberian Peninsula, and by others as a symbolic reference to the maritime powers of the end times. And who are the young lions? Smaller powers following the commercial empire's lead. Some scholars see them as Western nations who, instead of resisting, simply watch. They comment, they analyze, but they don't act. They question, but never intervene. And perhaps behind this diplomatic neutrality lies the greatest pact of all, the pact of omission, the act of pretending there is no war, while the world is swallowed by the same prophetic abyss Ezekiel described with chilling accuracy. Now put the pieces together. Russia and Iran are arming. Turkey wavers. Europe falls silent. Africa is divided. And the West watches. Gog is winning, without firing a single bullet, because he doesn't fight like men do. He fights like ideas, like algorithms, like treaties no one reads, but everyone signs. And that's the war no one is ready to face. A war where the alliances aren't forged with swords, but with silence. And what if Gog isn't a man at all? What if he's a system, an ideology that infiltrates every nation, offering security in exchange for submission? Because the next chapter will show you that this war is not just against Israel. It's against everything that still represents the divine in the modern world. And that battle may have already begun inside your own home. If this unsettled you, it's because it touched you. Leave a comment. Do you believe the silence of the West is strategic or spiritual? When you hear that Gog will attack Israel, it's easy to picture a geographical conflict, a map, a border. But Ezekiel never used words by accident. What if the target isn't the nation, but the spiritual meaning it carries? What's at stake isn't just the existence of a country, it's the survival of a promise. Israel isn't just land. It's a living reminder that there is still a God who intervenes, a people who still carry his name, a sacred sign that still pulses in the chaos of the modern world. Gog wants to destroy that, because what Israel represents is intolerable to a system that hates absolutes. In a world where everything is relative, Israel still holds a covenant that cannot be negotiated. And that's dangerous, Because that covenant reminds us that there are laws not written by man. There are codes that cannot be repealed by decree. There is a lineage that cannot be erased. And as long as Israel exists, Gog can never fully reign. Gog's attack, then, is spiritual. He wants to delegitimize, to discredit, to destroy prophetic authority. Look at the speeches of the nations today. Most don't attack directly. They attack legitimacy. They attack history. They question the right to the land, to identity, to the sacred. It's a war of narratives, of interpretations, of rewritings. And that's why it's so effective. Because it invades minds before it invades territories. And many have already lost, without even knowing it. The Book of Enoch gives us a dark clue about this. It says that in the last days, the throne will be moved from its place, and the eyes of the righteous will go dim for a time, as if truth will be hidden temporarily, as if the entire world falls under a spell. And that is exactly what's happening. A fog has overtaken the nations, a selective blindness, where those who preach peace actually sow control, where those who claim to defend the truth are rewriting history. The most dangerous part of it all is that the war against the sacred is fought using the language of peace. Gog doesn't arrive shouting. He arrives negotiating, promising balance, safety, and neutrality. But behind that speech is the denial of God himself. Because to accept the God of Israel is to acknowledge moral limits. It means humans are not the center. That power has an owner. And that is unacceptable to those who want to be worshipped. Gog wants the throne, but first he must erase the one who sits on it. And here's the most uncomfortable point. This war is also inside the church. How many spiritual leaders today reject Israel, reject the biblical roots, reject the authority of the ancient texts? How many have bowed to the spirit of the age, trading revelation for relevance? The spirit of Gog isn't just out there. It's already inside. It disguises itself as modernity, but moves like heresy. And many are being used without realizing, fighting against the promise, believing they are serving God. There is a spiritual principle being broken across the world, the principle of covenant. Ezekiel describes Gog coming like a storm. This isn't a fair war. It's a cowardly strike, a calculated effort to erase centuries of divine memory, to bury the covenant that still holds the world together. Because without Israel, there is no Bible. Without the Bible, no judgment. And without judgment, no resistance. That's what the system wants. A world without consequences, without truth, without limits. But the prophecy assures us, Gog will fall, not by human weapons, but by the direct intervention of the Most High. Because this war, though it looks political, is actually a divine summons, a reckoning, a final test. And those who resist the temptation to follow Gog will be part of the remnant, the few who still guard the promise, the few who know that the true throne is not visible, but is about to be restored. And in the next chapter, we'll uncover how this judgment begins, where it will be fought, and what role each of us is meant to play. Because the real question isn't whether Gog is coming, it's whether you'll be standing when he does. If this war is also moving inside you, subscribe now. This isn't about politics. It's about what still remains true inside us. Everyone expects trumpets, skies opening, angels shouting. But what if judgment isn't a loud event? What if it begins exactly as Ezekiel described, with military movements disguised as diplomacy, with coalitions masked as treaties, with the whole world laughing, while the prophetic clock ticks forward? The Bible is clear. Gog will be pulled by God, which means even the war is part of the plan. But the plan is not to destroy. It's to reveal, to expose, to divide, and the judgment has already begun. In Ezekiel 38:10, the Lord says Gog will have an evil thought, not an official order, not a public strategy, but a thought, something invisible. And from that thought, the movement begins. This teaches us a profound truth. Divine judgment doesn't begin with explosions, it begins in the unseen, when the intent of the heart grows larger than outward appearances, when ambition breaks through the mask, and when heaven decides it's time to uncover. No place is hidden enough. The world is being tested right now. Every nation, every leader, every person, not by their words, but by their reactions. And the question that echoes is, what do you do when you see prophecy unfolding before your eyes? Do you pretend it's not about you? Change the channel? Or ask yourself why you were born precisely in this moment? Ezekiel's final judgment isn't about destruction. It's about alignment, about who's already on the right side, even before anything is officially declared. War reveals the heart. The Book of Enoch holds a hidden clue that confirms this. The Watchers were judged even before they were defeated. They were confronted with the truth and fell because they refused it. Judgment begins with the confrontation of the conscience. When you know and choose to deny, that's when the fall begins. And what if the same is happening now? What if the world knows, on some deep layer of the soul, that it's repeating the rebellion? That it's serving Gog, even without saying his name? There's a Hebrew word, mishpat, often translated as judgment, but its meaning goes beyond punishment. Mishpat is the restoration of order. It's putting everything in its rightful place. And when Gog is pulled, the whole world will be rearranged. Everything will be revealed. The war will expose what has been hidden. It will show who pretended neutrality, who fed evil for convenience, and who held on to faith, even without applause. The line will be drawn, not by the noise of war, but by the silence of truth. You might think you have no role in this war, that it's all happening too far away, in Jerusalem, Tehran, Moscow. But what if I told you the real battlefield is somewhere else, that the final war is being fought inside of you, inside your mind, your faith, your choices? Ezekiel prophesied the physical attack, but the judgment that comes with it is spiritual, an invisible courtroom, where there are no prosecutors, only the reflection of what each soul chose to serve. That's why the ancient prophets never separated politics from spirituality. They knew every human war is a mirror of a greater conflict, and every silence in the face of evil is a response. Gog's war doesn't ask permission. It arrives when you no longer believe it's real, when everything seems normal, when people say peace and safety, and the ground gives way beneath your feet. But those who remain standing, even without understanding it all, will be preserved. So the question now is, are you awake? Do you still feel the call of the covenant? Because in the next chapter, we'll dive into the consequences of this confrontation and understand why Gog's downfall is not the end of the war, but the beginning of the final separation. What comes next will not be for everyone. If judgment has already begun, then your reaction to this video already counts. Comment below. Do you feel like you're in the middle of this invisible war? Many believe that once Gog is defeated, peace will return, that everything will end with fire, smoke, and silence. But the sacred text says otherwise. In Ezekiel 39, Gog's fate is sealed with surgical precision. His armies will be scattered across the mountains of Israel, their bodies left unburied for months. And the most terrifying part? God says he will use this war to sanctify himself before the nations. This is not just punishment, it's exposure. It's public judgment, the kind that reveals who was complicit, even in silence. The name of the place where Gog will fall is called the Valley of the Travelers, according to the Hebrew text, a symbolic location, a place of passage, of open-air judgment. There, the bones of the armies will be left as a sign, a prophetic warning, a reminder that the sacred is not to be mocked. But the question few dare to ask is, why does God allow Gog to go so far before intervening? Why wait until the war is on the brink of eruption to finally act? The answer lies in the pattern of biblical times. God allows the cup of iniquity to fill. He doesn't act impulsively. He waits until everything is exposed, until false alliances are revealed, until the speeches collapse, until even the righteous are tested. Because God's goal was never just to protect Israel. It was to reveal who Israel truly is. And beyond that, to separate those who still align with heaven from those who bow only to the world. And when that separation happens, it won't be visible. It won't come with badges or flags. It will happen in the spirit, in the desires of the heart, in the silence of the conscience. Many will fall with Gog, not because they marched beside him, but because they thought like him, because they hoped for his victory, because they laughed at the prophecy, because they mocked the signs, because they rejected the sacred in the name of logic. And in the eternal court, that weighs just as much as standing on the battlefield, The Book of Enoch foreshadows this pattern. It says that in the end times, the fallen will be gathered one last time to receive the sentence that had been delayed, not forgotten, delayed. Even the fallen angels were given time to repent, and the same time was granted to the nations, to the churches, to the leaders, to you. Judgment doesn't come just to punish. It comes to reveal who is still alive inside, who still bears the seal of the covenant, even in the midst of collapse. But here lies the most unsettling detail. Ezekiel says that after Gog's fall, a separate group will be needed to purify the land. A group that will search for bones, mark locations, cleanse the aftermath. This is symbolic. It shows that after the exposure comes responsibility. Those who survive will have to rebuild, to reorder, and it won't be done in haste. It will be done in reverence, because the earth will have been wounded by an invisible war, and the scar will be spiritual. Now think about this. What if this isn't just about Gog? What if the same process is happening on a personal scale? What if God is exposing, right now, what's inside each of us? What if you are living your own Ezekiel war, with thoughts being uncovered, intentions being tested, silences being judged? Because in the end, the real question won't be, whose side were you on, but who did you become during the war? And that question leads us directly to the final chapter, because after Gog falls, something even deeper begins. It's not the end of the world. It's the beginning of a new era, a time of restoration, but only for those who remained standing, not physically, but spiritually. The next chapter will reveal what will be restored, and what will be lost forever. If you've made it this far, perhaps it's because you still carry something the world couldn't erase. Subscribe now. The separation has already begun, and your steadfastness matters. The war of Gog ends, but something much quieter begins. The earth, spiritually devastated, begins to be cleansed, and what rises from the ruins is not just a restored nation. It is a consciousness, a people who survived not by strength, but by faithfulness. Ezekiel 39 ends with a promise that few mention. I will no longer hide my face from them. This is the true climax of the prophecy, not the end of war, but the return of intimacy with the divine. It's as if God had been waiting for this moment for centuries, a time when judgment would reveal the sincere, a time when the entire world would fall, so that what is eternal could rise. After Gog's fall, God doesn't offer revenge. He offers restoration. He promises to pour out his spirit upon the house of Israel. And here lies the divine irony. Gog tried to erase the promise and ended up activating its fulfillment. Because every war against the sacred only accelerates the very plan it seeks to stop. The Book of Enoch says that after the judgment of the fallen, the earth would be renewed, and the righteous would inherit a light that never fades. Ezekiel and Enoch speak of the same moment, from opposite sides of eternity. One sees armies falling, the other sees the heavens opening, but both confirm the same destiny. After exposure comes separation. After separation comes healing. And this healing won't be collective. It will be spiritual. A regeneration that begins inside each survivor. And maybe you didn't realize it, but this script was never just about prophecy. It was about you. Because every name mentioned, Gog, Persia, Magog, Togarma, represents something that also exists within us. Ambition, omission, rebellion, fear, and the promise of a covenant that still endures. The true judgment is this. Do you recognize the signs when they're unfolding inside your own heart? Or are you still waiting for a trumpet before you finally wake up? The truth is, many have already fallen, smiling. Many have already betrayed in the name of tolerance. Many have already rejected the sacred while preaching compassion. And that's why judgment won't come the way we expect. It will come as a memory, as a mirror, as that moment when God looks directly into the soul and it can no longer hide. In that moment, everything you thought you knew will be confronted by what you've actually become. But there is hope. There always is. Because if you've listened this far, it means something inside you still breathes, still wants to know, still feels you don't belong to this corrupt world, still senses that something greater is waiting to be reawakened. And that is the good news hidden in the midst of war. The covenant still stands. It survived the flood, the exile, the persecution, modernity, and now it stands before you, not as a concept, but as an invitation. The final war is not the end. It is the beginning of a new story, a time when the face of God will no longer be hidden, when His Spirit will be poured out once again, but only upon those who did not trade their conscience, who resisted the seduction of Gog, who said no to the lie, even when it felt safe, who chose truth, even when it cost everything. And maybe, just maybe, this video was the trumpet you didn't expect to hear. If this was the trumpet you didn't expect, then respond with action. Subscribe, share, and tell us in the comments, what did this message awaken in you?